It's a really tricky balancing act. And if you just put a alcohol causes cancer label on booze, some of the research suggests that will actually turn people off completely and not change their behavior at all.
Welcome back to Closer Look on this Tuesday, November the 4th, 2025. Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief, Derek Turner, producer, is in the room. I'm Scott Sexsmith. So bad enough that not only did the Jays not win the World Series, none of us won $25 million.
No. Did you buy a ticket to that?
Yeah.
What did the Jays Care Foundation lottery?
Jays Care, yeah.
50-50 drop?
50-50.
And what's it? Did I read it was up to $25 million? For the winner or in total?
No. Total was over $50 million.
Wow.
Winner got 25.
Yes, and the winner was
biggest in history.
Yeah, and the winner was announced today or yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yeah, 25 million. Someone from Oshawa.
I was waiting for Joe Carter to call.
He didn't give you a call. He calls you anyway once a week just to check.
Joe and I are like this.
I did see the story and I did see all the news reports on it, but I was surprised that they only published the person's first name.
That is weird. I know with OLG. You always know. I mean, you see a picture of them, right?
And you have to. That's part of the deal. Is that you don't want people to think that it's not real. That someone's actually not winning. Yeah. Not that I think this one isn't real.
No, we're not suggesting.
I'm sure it was real, just like the Dodgers win. It was legit. It was real. Yeah, it's
found some salt to put in that open wind, eh? Good for you.
Today's all about money. Federal budget days today.
Yes, lots of questions.
We're recording in the afternoon. By the time it comes to air, we'll know all the details of the federal budget.
And we'll run it down tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll have a big chat about that tomorrow.
Speaking of money, coming up next Monday on the show, David Chilton, The Wealthy Barber. Remember that book that came out years ago? Yeah. There's an updated version that actually dropped today. Mm-hmm. So David's been kind enough to hop on the podcast next Monday. With us to talk about the book and how we should be saving our pennies.
I'm looking forward to that. I think we can all use that advice with things that are going on in the world today.
You know what? There's not a lot of things that are must watch, but when it comes to money and finance and getting ahead, I mean, this will be a good one for sure.
Yeah, I think I saw some headlines today or yesterday, new research out about just the disconnect between young people and money, and their just total lack of understanding of money. And I know the schools, we've talked on the show about how the schools are changing some of the curriculum to bring more kind of basic money knowledge into the curriculum, which is important. But it really is, people don't like to talk about money. People don't like to involve money in their relationship, but it's so critical to understand how it works. And especially the way you see the consumer price index right now with groceries, it's going through the roof.
It's crazy.
And
it's crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
I go to the grocery store, a couple times a week and, you drop $40, $50, $60 and the bag load seems to be getting smaller.
Yes.
Shrinkflation, was that the term?
It does. It feels like you go to the store, you drop $90, you bring one bag of groceries home.
It's wild.
It is crazy.
It's like, where the hell is everything? I spent $90.
I know. Speaking of shopping, a lot of segues in this.
I know. I love this.
Keep it going. Yes, we didn't even plan any of this. We're going to talk today about alcohol sales. We talk about alcohol. I don't know if there's a trend there going. We talk about booze a lot, but the Senate's been debating a potential bill to put cancer warnings on alcohol.
Yes.
And this is kind of a real talker. A lot of people have different opinions on this. Some people are comparing it to smoking and that it's a no-brainer, but it's not really the same thing. So we're going to have a detailed conversation with that with an old friend of the show, Dan Malleck. He's a Brock University professor and chair of the Health Sciences Department over there. He's an expert on alcohol policy.
Right.
And he'll get us all up to speed on this one.
The Canadian Senate is debating whether to add cancer warning labels to alcohol packaging across Canada, but one expert says that could mislead the public. Brock University professor and chair of health sciences Dan Malleck argues the labels paint an unbalanced picture of alcohol's risks and ignores evidence that moderate drinking may actually have benefits. Dan joins us tonight on Closer Look. Dan, good to see you again. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
All right.
Good to be here.
Well, we're glad that you're here. Let's start with what's being proposed here, Dan. What exactly would these new cancer warning labels say, and how prominently would they appear on alcohol packaging?
Yeah, some of that isn't quite clear from the legislation. The legislation has 4 points, and only one of them is about the cancer warnings itself. But it's the one that's most contentious. So it doesn't give a size. I'm actually looking at it right now. But what it does say is the label needs to indicate the volume of the beverage that constitutes a standard drink, the number of standard drinks in the package, the number of standard drinks that, in the opinion of the department, that being the Health Canada, should not be exceeded in order to avoid significant health risks, and a message from the department that sets out the direct causal link between alcohol consumption and the development of fatal cancer. So that's the language of the bill that's being considered. So the last two, I think, are the ones that are especially concerning to people who are debating this.
All right. Dan, do we know what stage in the legislative process is this law?
Yeah, so it's a Senate bill. So it originated in Senate. It's actually kind of tricky because it was proposed in the last session of Senate, but then we had the election, so then it was reintroduced. It's in the committee stage, which means it's past second reading in Senate, and then after the committee looks at it, and the committee is I don't know the exact name of the committee. It's something like the Standing Committee on Social Affairs, Science, and Technology. Once that committee sends it back to Senate, it will go into third reading, and then it'll go to the House of Commons. So, and from people I've talked to, they say they're pretty sure it will pass in Senate. Yeah.
Interesting. Dan, do you know, or have other jurisdictions around the world brought in this kind of labeling on alcohol?
I don't think there is. Labeling is kind of an interesting thing. So I don't think there is any. Well, I mean, I don't know all jurisdictions, but the ones that they talk to, Ireland is one that has introduced these labels, but they're similar labels, but there's been some pushback, and not just from industry, but also from sort of like the EU and some members of the Irish government who are concerned about its effect on trade, especially on trade throughout the EU, because labeling requirements then would have to be imposed on other products coming into the country, and that could be a hindrance to trade, I think, is the main argument. And Ireland is being held up as the standard bearer now for this kind of legislation, even though we haven't seen its effect. We've just seen it get passed, right? So I think 2028 is when it's been delayed until implementation until 2028. I think 2028 is the number that's in my head on that one. But other jurisdictions do have some labeling. The U.S. has, I think, labels have to have something about harms of alcohol to fetuses. And I can't really, each jurisdiction is different, but sometimes these are also industry rules. So like industry will say, look, we recognize this, so we'll implement different types of things. So for example, a standard drink label. So in the United Kingdom, I'm not sure if it's industry or the government that imposed what's called they have to indicate the number of units. That's the term that's used in the UK, the number of units of alcohol, and talk about how many units is safe for men and women, or how many units is recommended max. And a unit is like basically half a pint of beer is a unit. So 2 units is a pint, kind of thing.
Dan, you've said these labels would mislead consumers. What specifically do you find misleading about them?
Well, two things. The first is that health. There's a lot of discussion around health harms of alcohol, and there is a cohort of researchers who are really ramping up the research intensity. And yet there are a lot of other researchers who are saying, hold on, it's not all bad, right? So when you look at what's called population health research, which is where you take these broad databases that look at people's behavior and sort of, I don't want to say mess with it, but like aggregate it, right? So bring it together and sort of look at the outcomes. You get indications of some things that increase. So, for example, cancer risk increases in a slight way, and then some things that seem to be protective at low levels. Like, so, for example, alcohol is protective in cardiovascular disease, up to what I've seen is about 10 standard drinks a week. And the effect on diabetes is actually pretty significant across the board. And I think that has something to do with insulin uptake or something. I know someone who's diabetic who says every time she drinks a glass of wine, she looks at her insulin monitor or the monitors that some diabetics wear, and it just changes quickly in a positive way, right? So back in 2023, the Canadian Centers on Substance Use and Addiction released this big guidance we all have talked about. I think we talked about this before, that says 2 drinks is low risk. After that, it increases your risk. But this is based on a host of risks, and the way they've combined this is really problematic because it suggests that everyone is at equal risk of drinking and driving, for example, or everyone is at equal risk of every woman is at equal risk of breast cancer. And they're not. Like, there's a whole bunch of different factors that go into this. I'm not trying to minimize breast cancer risk, but the way it's represented, I say, distorts the picture. And it's the sort of thing that more nuance is needed. But if you're trying to push for the kind of legislation we're seeing now, nuance is not your friend.
Yeah, nuance doesn't really work on warning labels. That's really because warning labels by definition are there to scream at us and tell us that there's something where my concern, and I'm no expert obviously, but you do worry that these labels would actually mislead consumers, because if you say, if you drink alcohol, this bottle of alcohol, it will increase your chance of cancer. Whereas if you really dig deep into the numbers, it's actually particular types of cancer. And if it did actually raise, can you give an example, Dan? Like, I think there's a couple examples where if you did, it would increase approximately 90% chance of developing certain types of cancer at 14 drinks a week. Can you tell us that example?
Yes. Yeah, so I'm drawing this information from the CCSA's own guidance document. And just as a caveat, they present what's called relative risk data. So it's relative to your risk, the relative increase based upon certain behavior. It's kind of a tricky one, because if you say a risk increases by 100%, that doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get it. It's 100% increase on the risk. So I think the one you're talking about that I've talked about in other things is oral pharyngeal cancers. I think 14 drinks a week, according to the CCSA data, increases your risk by 90%, which sounds terrifying, except the risk of getting oral pharyngeal cancer is remarkably low. And the death rate is something like 0.0054%. So 5.4 per 100,000 people. I'm not to say that that's not, I mean, if you've got oral pharyngeal cancer, it's significant, right? But when you're talking about risk, you need to give people that kind of information. And I think that what happens is some people, for genetics or lifestyle or whatever, have an increased risk of this. And it might be the sort of thing that they would want to, consider or talk to their physician about, or, make some lifestyle adjustments. But when you just say it's going to increase your risk of cancer, it does lead to worry and panic and a misunderstanding of risk and of risk from drinking and from other things. And in effect, it could negatively affect people in other ways, because we know also from research that stress, worry, anxiety, all of these things increase health harms, right? So it really needs to be done in a moderate way. Ironically, we're talking about drinking and we're talking about policy that's moderate. And I worry, and I've said this, I was at Senate last week talking about this, that they're not, it's not proportional to the risk. So in comparison to, I think I used oral pharyngeal cancer because it's the highest risk according to the CCSA, even though breast cancer is more risky, like 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed with breast cancer. But if you compare the cancer risk of breast cancer, say, moderate drinking 7 to 10 drinks a week raises a woman's risk of breast cancer by, I think it's something like 12.5%, which isn't insignificant, except it relative to that, it means a woman's risk increases from 12.6%, that's 1 in 8, to 14.1%. So it's a much different risk than saying your risk increases. But at the same time, they compare this to tobacco,
Yes.
right? So
That's
one
what
of
I was
the
going to ask
common,
you. So good point. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no problem. I mean, it's stop me.
No,
if you want to ask a
not at
question.
all.
But the common, I've seen this, it's a talking point now when talking about cancer risk, where they will say, and I've seen this also with talking about other products, but the phrase is alcohol is a group 1 carcinogen, just like tobacco and asbestos. And that's the quote that you hear everywhere. You hear public at the Senate committee, you hear this from senators, from other witnesses. Well, group 1 carcinogen is just a definition of something that there's sufficient evidence to show that it does cause cancer in humans. It doesn't mean it's going to kill you instantly. It doesn't mean you're guaranteed to have cancer. It's not like walking into Chernobyl, right? But other group 1 carcinogens include bacon and estrogen, right? So estrogen is a high, increased estrogen production increases a woman's risk of breast cancer, right? But I'm pretty sure that hormone replacement therapy, which means you're taking a carcinogen, is not like covered in warning labels, right? So we need to balance that, and the risk of cancer from, say, HRT or from drinking or from eating bacon is nothing like the risk from tobacco. Yet they're treated equivalently, and that's one of the big issues with this. Is repeatedly people say it's just like tobacco. It is nowhere near the same as tobacco.
Well, that struck me, right, Dank? That's the way I thought of it. I mean, there's no way that smoking, as we've talked before, it's the one product designed to actually kill you. That's what it's for, right? And so to put those very graphic labels on cigarettes seems to make sense. But if I think of grabbing a bottle of whiskey off the shelf and that was on the bottle of whiskey, I just don't think it's the same thing.
And another challenge. So yes, I agree with you. At the same time, I'm not going to defend tobacco by any means.
That'd be fun. Let's do that.
I'm a huge
Can't open worms everywhere.
I am not a fan of tobacco. I suspect it killed my father, who died at 49 from lymphoma. He had been a smoker. He quit before that. But the interesting thing about warning labels is people think that warning labels was the thing that stopped people from smoking. And smoking, the whole process of stopping people from smoking was not just warning labels. In fact, I would suspect some of the research suggests that warning labels was a minor part of it. It was things like clean air laws where you couldn't smoke indoors, and new clinical interventions like e-cigarettes and things like that helped. Right? It wasn't just warning labels. But what's interesting about warning labels and alcohol is that there's been a lot of really conflicting research on this, saying whether it's helpful or not. There was a study done, and this is what a lot of the current alcohol researchers refer to as the so-called Yukon study of labeling. But the funny thing about this is that I'm laughing because it's kind of ridiculous, is that these guys, they did this study, you may have heard about it. It was supposed to be an 8-month controlled trial, which means you have a site where you're doing an intervention and a site where you're not, and then you're comparing the outcomes. And they put these bright yellow and red labels on liquor bottles, and it was 2017 to 2018 I think it was in Whitehorse. And then they had a control site in another town. I can't remember where that was. And then they tracked liquor consumption, liquor purchases, and then they interviewed people about whether they noticed the labels, right, and whether they thought about this. The problem with this study is that after 2 months, the liquor industry said, excuse me, but that's our product, and you're, I think they use the word defaming our product, especially with the cancer labels. And so the study was halted. The bottles were pulled off the shelf. And I think after 2 months, they came back with, because there were other things on the labels, like how much of a standard drink it was, basically the things that were in the legislation. But they pulled off the cancer warning label. And then they continued for another 2 months, and then they interviewed people. It was from any, I got criticized for using this word reasonable, but from any reasonable perspective, it is a really problematic study, because After 2 months, when they pulled the labeled bottles off the shelf, there's a lot of media about this. So you can't then go to community to consumers and say, "Do you remember seeing these labels?" and think that the label itself was what stuck in your head, right? Because it could be like there's an article in January on the news about, oh yeah, the booze companies want this taken off, and you get a lot of talking heads saying, "Oh, this is good" or "This is bad," and so people are going, "Oh yeah, I remember that label on the bottle." So it really messes with the study, but it doesn't matter to the researchers who did this study. They have published, I think it's a dozen different articles now about the efficacy of labeling, even though it was a really deeply flawed study. I know I'm sort of getting into the weeds here, but my point is that they're really ramping up this argument about labeling, and all they found was that people remember the labels. And they also saw a decrease in a decrease in purchases. But it was also during January, right? So you got November to December, you're seeing increases in purchases, and then what happens in January? So there are a lot of problems that they don't identify. At the same time, there's been some other really interesting research that says overly, what's the word, like restrictive or scary kind of labeling turns people off labels and turns people against the information from health authorities, right? So it's a really tricky balancing act. And if you just put a alcohol causes cancer label on booze, some of the research suggests that will actually turn people off completely and not change their behavior at all.
Dan, quickly, let's talk about moderate drinking. We've all heard about the potential health benefits. You've spoken to it, in fact, lowering the risk of heart disease. How strong is the evidence?
So this is one of the things that's really being heavily debated right now. And so the challenge when talking about strength of evidence is there is a cohort of researchers who are specifically focused on reducing the strength of that evidence. So I can't really answer that question. What I can, because it's debated. Some of the, I mean, for decades, we have had research that shows that moderate drinking, and we're talking about like a drink or two a day max, is protect or reduces what's called all-cause, what's it called? The terms like all-cause mortality, right? So if you drink, people who drink moderately don't die as early as people who are abstainers, right? But then after a few drinks a day, it increases. The effect that most people think is going on there is the fact that alcohol reduces bad cholesterols in your bloodstream and increases, I don't know if it increases good cholesterols, but it reduces bad cholesterols, which are related to cardiovascular ill health and stroke, right? So a heart attack is when one of your blood vessels or one of the things feeding your heart fails or is blocked. But at the same time, some people have argued that that list of abstainers includes people who quit drinking because they're sick, right? So in which case, but then other people have removed that group from their evidence and found, no, in fact, there's still a protective effect at low amounts. And then other people have started to fiddle with the numbers. Recently, a really celebrated study in the Journal of the American Medical Association removed abstainers altogether, because they said, well, maybe some of those abstainers aren't really abstainers, so we'll just remove them, which is a ridiculous, I'm trying to understand the logic behind this, but it was celebrated as finally showing that there's no effect. And what happened in the US over Christmas last year was that several different groups released conflicting studies, and one of them was considering the nutrition label guidelines and safe. They do this, I think, every 10 years, look at safe consuming guidelines. And they argued, and it was a really interesting study because it didn't just say good or bad. It said, these things need to be taken, these are some of the complicating factors in these health harms. Yes, there's an increased cancer risk, a moderate increase in cancer risk, but there are other protective factors, and people need to consider that, right? That was really good health information. It was not driven by a group of people who are trying to sort of crank up their, I don't know, whatever they're trying to do. I don't want to imply motives, although I have them.
I get what you're saying. No, I understand what you're saying.
Right. So they're trying to, so this was trying to give reasoned, what I read as clinical recommendations, right? This is how you should approach this. But there's other people who are just saying, no, you just have to put warning labels on it, just like it's time, including the Surgeon General, whose report reads like it was written by some of those anti-alcohol researchers.
Yeah. I find it fascinating, right? Because we do want to have legitimate information, health information, for sure. We want to have authorities in the country that can tell us accurate facts about things. But at the same time, as a consumer, I know that if I go to McDonald's tonight, it's probably not a good idea for my health. I'm not in the best shape. I probably shouldn't eat it. But I know that. I don't need a big warning on my Big Mac box that tells me that. I get it. If I go home tonight and have 2 beers, I know that's I should probably just have 1, right? So you're not going to all be shocked and oh my goodness, this happened.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way, I'm definitely not a scientist, Professor. But I guess what I wanted to ask you is, what was your takeaway message when you testified at Senate last week? Well, what was your main message to them?
My message to them was this is disproportionate to the risk. That was my main message, and I used the cancer equivalency argument, and also I talked about the way we think about risk, right? So when we think about alcohol, often, especially in policy circles, we jump to the worst examples of this, right? So we start talking about drinking and driving and addiction and violence and all of these things that are risks, but not at low levels, right? And you saw this in the Senate testimony where people would say, my father was an alcoholic and he died of pancreatic cancer or something like this. And he was an alcoholic. I mean, that's terrible, but that's excessive, right? People who become an addict, people who drink and drive, those are things that are already constrained and should be constrained, right? Or at least people should be concerned about. But even when the low risk drinking guidance came out, and there were I would hear talk shows where people would start talking about addiction and like these extremes of drinking, instead of saying, well, no, we're talking about 2 drinks a week guidance. Like, that's not going to lead to addiction, and that's probably not even going to lead to drinking and driving. So there was a problem with that. So part of my argument was we need to be aware of our own biases and where we go when we're thinking about this. But my takeaway from the Senate meeting was that this committee was not interested in hearing a balance of information. It was interested in hearing evidence in favor of the bill that they can then use to shame the federal government to do something. Right. And it was really disappointing to me because I thought, in the Senate committee, the process should be the committee examines all facets of this bill to see its impact. And they had no interest. I was sitting beside someone from the beer industry, and they called this the industry panel, which really was frustrating to me because I'm not from industry. I'm not paid by industry. I am a customer, right? But so are a bunch of other people in that committee. So there was not a lot of receptivity to contrary information that might help them understand the need for moderation.
Absolutely. Well, the good news is you can teach a political science course now because you have the health aspect, and now you've testified in front of the Senate, and you know everything's going on.
Well, normally I do teach a policy course, and so I'm saying because I'm not teaching that this year, and I want to sort of jump in and just give them some examples of policy making in action.
For sure.
Dan, anything that we didn't cover tonight that you'd like to leave on?
I think I'm good. I could go on for hours, as you can tell, but it was it's a really interesting process. There's a lot of, one thing that I'll say about this committee was that I was very frustrated when the liquor industry didn't seem to want to step up. Like, they did talk about the number of different associations that were asked to speak, and I was kind of like the bottom of the list, so they asked me. But now I understand why, because it wasn't actually, like I said, a reasoned investigation of the issue. It seemed to be more of an ambush, a chance for senators to attack the liquor industry for what they would say not doing enough or just being out for profit and things like that. And that's no way to do policy in a liberal democracy, right? Because we have a diversity of perspectives.
All right, good stuff. There's Dan Malleck, Chair of Health Sciences at Brock University. Dan, you're right. We could sit here and talk all night about this stuff. We appreciate your time as always.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
All this talk about having a drink, I get a little parched over here.
Yeah, but now I'm nervous. My risk level is elevated. I feel more nervous. We should do a challenge where you and I follow every health rule that exists. Yeah, I almost choked there saying that.
You did. All right.
We should follow every health rule. We should follow the food guide, the alcohol rules. We don't smoke, which is good.
No.
But we should just imagine how good we'd look after a few weeks.
Do you think we would?
Not us. No, we wouldn't look good. No. I do find this fascinating, right? Because the concept of risk is such a loaded topic, right?
Yes.
You could talk about risk all day. Why do some people jump out of airplanes for fun? I wouldn't jump out of an airplane. Not that I necessarily think I was going to die, but I'd probably be worried that I would die.
Because there's a chance.
There's no chance, but people want to do that. Why do people go mountain biking on the side of huge hills and they can fly? I mean, it's idea. And then so, and I really do believe that that if you have too many drinks, it's not good for you.
No.
If you eat these chocolate, there's chocolate all over my house since Halloween. If I have some of these chocolate bars, I know it's not good for me.
No.
But at some point, it's balancing like how do you want to live versus the fact that we're all going to die anyway at some point. I mean, if the liquor store shelves were full of bottles with a cancer warnings, there'd be thousands of cancer warnings in every store. I think that's overkill. Personally, I do. Personally, as a cancer patient,
exactly. Yeah,
I find
would it influence your buying decisions?
No, not at all.
As someone who,
I guarantee you that the day I'm going down, I'm going to have a drink, and I'm going to be thrilled that alcohol existed, that I could have drinks with people I care about and have a toast. It's just even the cigarette debate. I find it's sad because we know how addictive cigarettes are. They're designed to kill you. They're designed to addict you, right?
Yes.
But people make that choice, and they're smoking. I get, that's their decision if they want. I have very, very dear friends who I love with all my heart that are big smokers.
Yep.
And I tell them, I go, you're an idiot, you shouldn't smoke. But if they want to smoke and they're going to die of smoking, that was their life. They made that choice. They knew the risk is the word, right?
Yeah.
They knew the risks.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm sure there's communities in Ontario that have higher rates of cancer than others because of whatever industry is in that community.
Well,
we don't want to
look at us.
That's right.
We know.
You never know, right? Should they have signs when you drive into those towns that there's a higher level of benzene coming into the air?
That's a good question.
Govern yourself accordingly. I don't know. It's if you want to research, if you want to learn things, you can learn them. If you really want to know what's in your food, you can do some Google searches and do some research.
We talked quickly about the health benefits, and I always remember hearing a glass of red wine a day had some health benefits.
Yeah.
Now I don't know if that is outdated, but I remember hearing that.
For me, if we're ever going to get a letter, maybe it'll be today. But for me, it's even just that life's stressful, right? You have things going on in life, kids, works hard. When you have that glass of wine at 7 p.m. or a beer, it's the greatest feeling in the world. You're like, okay, this brings you down a notch, makes you feel a little better. If that's the benefit of it, then for me, that's a health benefit on its own. It just makes you feel a little better.
All right. Okay. We mentioned we better change gears here. You know what's going to hit the fan. Yeah. We thought we'd do a social experiment and just call people as Joe Carter.
Yes. That was Derek today. That was great. So we're going to start tomorrow.
Yeah.
What would the ringtone of it? So they answer the phone. How would it be? So, hello?
Hi, is this Michael?
Yes.
Michael, it's Joe Carter calling.
You should say, touch a ball, Joe.
Touch. You'll never hit a bigger home run.
My God. But you can use the person's first name, though. We don't give last names.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well,
we've gone way over time here.
In that vein, on behalf of Derek and Michael, I'm Scott. We appreciate your time tonight. As always, closerlookpodcast.ca or reach out, as I'm sure you might want to after tonight, closerlook at villagemedia.ca. We'll be back tomorrow night, another episode of Closer Look at 7 o'clock right here across the Village Media Network.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.